Shabbos Daf concise discusses two separate subjects. It first of all discusses the kavla, what this device was. We're going to work with the opinion that it was a slave's symbol that he wore, and the Gemara will have two contradictions and a number of different distinctions to explain them. This will take us into the halachos of the bells that certain animals or slaves wore, and whether or not you're allowed to carry them, and or not they are mekabel tuma. In what circumstances are they considered to be functional, and they are mekabel tuma? In what circumstances are they considered to be non-functional and not mekabel tuma? The daf begins with a discussion of a special type of seal, a symbol that was worn by avadim, by slaves, to show that they were actually avadim. Now, Shmuel understands that this is what our Mishnah was referring to when it referred to a kavla. So you're not allowed to wear a kavla in the street on Shabbos. We had seen previous opinions that it refers to some cap that women wore, but Shmuel says no, it's referring to this Eved's symbol, this Eved's seal that he wore. Now, the Gemara will have to resolve a number of contradictions about this thing, because there are two contradictory statements of Shmuel, and there are two contradictory brises. So we're going to have to make a number of different distinctions as to when you are allowed to wear this thing and when one is not allowed to wear this Eved's seal, and therefore we're going to have a number of different distinctions. Let's list what the distinctions are first, and then we'll see how the Gemara uses them to resolve the various contradictions. First of all, there's a distinction as to who made the seal for the Eved. If it was made by the master, then the Eved has to wear it all the time. He cannot be caught without it. And therefore, first of all, on the one hand, he's less likely to take it off. On the other hand, if it falls off, he's going to want to carry it home if it's salvageable. If he made it himself, so then on the one hand, he's more likely to want to take it off and carry it because he's not afraid to be caught without it. On the other hand, if it smashes, he's not going to carry it home. Another distinction is, where is he wearing it? If he's wearing it around his neck and it falls off and breaks, there's nothing he can do. He can't bring it home, and he can't carry it home in his hand. Carrying it in your hand doesn't count as wearing the symbol to show that one is a slave, an Eved. On the other hand, if it's pinned to his clothing, so then what he may do is fold his clothing in such a manner that the master can't see that it's missing, but folding the clothing in that way is carrying itself. So that leads to another issue of carrying. A third distinction is, what is this thing made out of? Most of them were made out of clay, and if they fall, they smash. On the other hand, one which is made out of metal can be salvaged when it falls, and the Eved may therefore carry it home in his hand. So let's see how we work out the different statements over here. So we begin with Shmuel. Shmuel says when our Mishnah said that an Eved is not, when our Mishnah said that one is not allowed to wear a kavla in the street, it's referring to an Eved wearing this symbol, and the Mishnah is saying that there under no circumstances may an Eved wear this thing in the street. Now the Gemara says that contradicts a different statement of Shmuel, where Shmuel says it depends. It depends where he's wearing it. If he's wearing it around the neck, then he is allowed to. If he's wearing it pinned to his clothing, then he's not allowed to. So we have a contradiction. Shmuel in one place said that the Eved is allowed to wear it around his neck, and in the Mishnah, he understood that the Mishnah said that he's not allowed to wear it at all. So the Gemara says it's not a contradiction. Our first offering is that the difference is who made the thing. Where Shmuel said that he is allowed to wear it around his neck in the street, that's referring to one that his master made for him, and he'd be afraid to take it off, and therefore he won't end up carrying it at all. So the Gemara says, well, hold on a second. If Shmuel's halacha, the one which is not in the Mishnah, where he says you're allowed to wear it around the neck, is referring to where the master made it, so then what's the problem with it being pinned to his shirt? He will also not take it off there. So Gemara says, yeah, but here's the pshat, because if it's pinned to his shirt, it may fall off, and if it falls off, it'll smash. There's nothing he could do about it, so what he'll end up doing is folding his cloak in such a way to cover up the spot where it was, so that it should not be immediately obvious that he's not wearing it. But folding it in that manner is not the normal way of wearing it, and we learned halacha that if you wear a cloth folded in the incorrect way, that's carrying itself. You're carrying the folds of the cloth. And now the Gemara stops for a second in our discussion and proves that this is true. And that Shmuel said to Rav Chinan bar Shilo, he said that all the Rabbanim, the rabbis of the house of the Reish Galusa, the governor in charge of the Jewish community, who was not necessarily an upstanding individual, so all these Rabbanim had to wear a very similar seal. They had to wear a symbol of the Reish Galusa. So they can't wear the symbols in the street, because if they fall off, they may come to fold the cloak so that it shouldn't be seen that they're not wearing it. But Shmuel said to Chanina bar Shila, you don't have to worry about it. You are so close, personal friend of the Reish Galusa, you don't have to be afraid that if your thing falls off, you may end up folding your shirt to cover the spot where it's missing, and therefore you're allowed to wear it on Shabbos. There's not any problem. Okay, so we've resolved the contradiction in Shmuel's two statements. Now, however, we have two brises, which are contradictory, and we're going to have to resolve the contradictions between them. So the first brisa says pretty much what Shmuel said. It says that a slave is allowed to wear the symbol around his neck, but he's not allowed to wear it pinned to his clothing. That's exactly what Shmuel said. But we're going to have a brisa that says differently. The brisa is a long brisa. It discusses a few things. It discusses symbols worn by an eved and by an animal, and the bells that a eved and an animal would wear. So it says as follows. The brisa says whether it's an animal or an eved, and whether he's wearing the bell or the symbol, or whether it's worn around the neck or pinned to the clothing or the blanket of the animal, it may not be worn in the street with the one exception, and that is the bell that the eved is wearing pinned to his clothing. That's an ornament, that's a normal thing to wear, and that he's allowed to. Everything else may not be worn in the street. The Gemara will discuss the difference in all these things. And now the Brisa says, what about, are these things mekabel tumah or not? Can they become tameh? Something can only become tameh if it's a functional garment or ornament. And the Brisa tells us that the animal devices are not mekabel tumah, they're not functional. The only thing which is functional is the eved's attached to his clothing, or it's worn around his neck. The eved's bell is mekabel tumah. Anyway, but what we see for our intents over here is that this Brisa says clearly that there's no difference between a seal which is worn around the neck or it's pinned to the clothing. Either way, an eved is not allowed to wear them in the street. So that's contradictory to the Brisa that says that he is allowed to wear them in the street if it's worn around his neck. So the Gemara says, okay, so maybe we'll use the same distinction which we used to resolve the two contradictions in Shmuel, because this is the exact same contradiction. So the answer could be that one is referring to where the slave made it for himself, and one is referring to where it was made by the master, and that's what we said. So one says, no, we don't have to say that, we could give a different distinction here, and that is that this brisa, which says that he's not allowed to wear them, is referring to where it's made out of metal. The reason we'll say that is because the brisa seems to indicate that it's made out of metal, because it says that it's not mekabel tumah. Now, only metal things can be mekabel tumah. Clay, which is not fired in the oven, is never mekabel tumah at all. So the Mishnah wouldn't say that. The brisa, would not say that. So it's got to be referring to a metal one. And now that is the distinction. If it's metal, so you can't let the eved wear it in the street at all, because if it falls off, he'll carry it home. It won't smash. And therefore, you can't let him wear it at all, lest it fall, and he carry it home. On the other hand, if it's made out of clay, you can let him wear it around his neck, because even if it falls and smashes, there's nothing he can do. He's not going to carry it home. Pinned to his clothing, like we said, he may cover up the spot where it used to be, and that would be carrying. So this is how we resolve it. Just to summarize exactly what comes out of this entire discussion over here, it turns out that if it's made out of metal, it can't be worn at all, because it can fall off. And he may carry it home. If, however, it's made out of clay, so then it depends. If the master put it on, so he's afraid to remove it, and he may carry it home. Therefore, he shouldn't wear it pinned to his cloak, because he may fold the spot where it was. However, he can wear it around his neck, because if it falls off and smashes, there's nothing he can do about it. However, the ones that he puts on himself, he should never wear at all, because he may just carry it in his hand because he can, and he feels free to be able to do that. Okay, now the Gemara is going to analyze this brisa about the bell and the symbol more in detail. The Gemara now analyzes the brisa which we just learned more deeply. The brisa had said that as far as the bell that an eved wears, it depends. If it's worn around his neck, he may not wear it in the street, but if it's worn pinned to his clothing, he is allowed to. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? So obviously the issue is whether or not it'll fall off. But either way, it could fall off, and then he'll end up carrying it home. So Gemara says, no, the one that's on his clothing is not talking about where it's pinned to his clothing that it could fall off. It's talking about where it's sewn to his clothing, and then it won't fall off. So you don't have to worry about that. The Gemara now asks about the next part of the Brisa. The Brisa had discussed whether or not a bell that's being worn by an animal or by an eved, whether or not it's mekabel tumah. Generally, the rule of a item which is mekabel tumah is that if it is functional, if it's useful, so then it is mekabel tumah. It is susceptible to tumah. If it's not functional, then it's not mekabel tumah. So this Brisa says that the bell of an animal, a cowbell or such, is not mekabel tumah, meaning it's not functional. So the Gemara says, what do you mean I have a Brisa that says that it is functional? And it is mekabel tumah. Now, the Brisa is much longer. We'll skip the rest of it for now and get back to it when the Gemara discusses it. Here we have a contradiction between two Brisas as to whether a cowbell is mekabel tumah or not. The Gemara says it's not a problem. One is talking about a functional cowbell, that it has a clapper. It has the piece inside that knocks against the shell of the bell and makes the sound. The other one, our first Brisa that said that it's not mekabel tumah, that piece is missing, and therefore it's not functional, so that's why it's not mekabel tumah. So Gemara says, well, hold on a second. How could you say that? We understood the functionality of the bell is not the sound that it makes. The fact that an item makes noise doesn't make it functional. The functionality of the bell is that it's an ornament. So who cares if it works to make sound or not? That's not the point. The point is that it's an ornament, and therefore whether it has a clapper or not, it's still functional, it's still an ornament. So Gemara says, no. We're not talking about that its functionality is the ornament, its functionality is the sound. And you're wrong. Sound does make something functional to be mekabel tumah, like we say in the pasuk, kol davar sheyaveh b'esh taviru b'esh. Anything which passes through fire should be purified. And the word davar there is extra. We really need to say we should read it as dibur, meaning anything which makes a sound is also considered functional, and therefore it counts. So now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that the functionality of the bell is the sound, and that in the Brisa we're referring to where it has no clapper and doesn't make any sound. So how come the Brisa says that if the bell is pinned to the shirt of an eved, that it is mekabel tumah? What do you mean? You just said its functionality is sound and it makes no sound. So how is it that it is mekabel tumah? Not only that, but I have a Brisa that says clearly, I have a list of all kinds of bells, and it clearly says that they are mekabel tumah only if they have a clapper, but not if they do not have a clapper. And on the list there you have the bells of that you have attached to a device that you use to crush spices. The sound was good for the spices. You have one that's on the svarim, the books that the children learn from to call the kids to class. There's bells that you hang around the child's neck so you can find the kid if he's lost. So all these things, it says clearly that if it has a bell, if it has a clapper and it works to make sound, then it is mekabel tumah. Otherwise, it's not. So how can you tell me that the case of the eved was referring to that the Brisa, which discussed the cowbell and the eved bell, and said that it's not mekabel tumah by the cowbell, but it is mekabel tumah by the eved bell, is referring to where it's non-functional and it makes no sound, then why should the eved bell be mekabel tumah? So Gemara answers, you're right. There are two functions to a bell. There is the ornament and there is the sound. Okay? So our Brisa was discussing one which is non-sound making. It did not have the clapper, it couldn't make a sound. So for the ornament, for the eved, it's an ornament and it's mekabel tumah. For the cow, it's not an ornament, it's not mekabel tumah. Now the other Brisa, which we just quoted before, which said that a cowbell is mekabel tumah, that's talking about where it had a clapper and it made a sound. Therefore it's functional even for the cow. All the cases which we just quoted, the book and the grinder and the children, those are all sound bells. They're designed to be used so that we can hear them. So if they don't have a clapper, they're not functional anymore. They are not mekabel tumah. Now, the Brisa had said that if it originally had a clapper and it was functional, and then the clapper was removed, and now it's not functional anymore, it still stays tameh, and it still stays able to be mekabel tumah. So the Gemara asks why it's not functional anymore. So Abaye says because it's easy to put the thing back. Since it's easy to put the thing back, we view it as if it's still attached and it's still functional. So Rava says, how could that be? we have a Mishnah that says that the clapper and the shell of the bell are considered to be attached. And if one of them becomes tamei, the other one is tamei. So you see from there that they are an integral part of each other. They're considered to be one item, and therefore, if one piece is missing, we should view it as if the whole thing is not functional. So Gemara says, maybe you'll tamei. No, the reason why, if one becomes tamei, the other one is tamei is precisely because of what Abaye said. Because even if it's removed, it's still considered to be attached because it's easy to reattach. So Gemara says, no, but I have another brisa. This brisa is discussing a blade of a carpenter's smoothing device and two sides of a pair of scissors that come apart. And the brisa says that they're considered to be attached l'chumra. That is, if one becomes tamei, the other becomes tamei, but they're considered to be detached l'kula. That's if you sprinkle on one, it's not considered like you sprinkled on the other one. And the Gemara, we had this earlier, the Gemara had explained that is a gzeira. Midaraisa, they should be considered attached while you're using them and detached while you're not using them. And we make a gzeira both ways, l'chumra. Consider it attached l'chumra, consider it detached l'chumra. We consider it attached so that tumah on one is matame the other half, but being matahir one is not matahir the other half. So Gemara says, so you see here clearly that the fact that they come back together doesn't help, because these things are only considered to be attached while they're being used, and they are actually attached. Now these things were made to come apart and be put back together. You could insert the blade so you could switch out the blade easily for a different one. So here you have devices. The point is, here you have devices that are easily detached, and they are considered to be attached only while they're being used, and they are attached. Once they're detached, then they're not considered to be attached. So the Gemara therefore says we have to have a different answer for why the bell is tamei even if the clapper is removed, as long as it was attached at some point, and that is that it's still useful. You could knock the bell against a pot, and then it can still make a sound. Now that only counts because it used to be a bell that was functional in the full way, that it used to have the clapper inside. Therefore, even though the thing is missing, you can still use it in some way, it still counts to be tamei. If it was never made properly in the first place, that would not help.